Hi everyone, this is Amy Johnson Crow, and welcome to this week's Archives.com live stream. This week we are going to go across the pond and use UK censuses. Now, I'm a firm believer that whenever you start to use a record type that you've never used before, it's a good idea to get a bit of background information about that resource that you're using. It can really help you when you're doing searches and will definitely help you when you are trying to evaluate what it is that you're seeing. So that's what we're going to do for the next few minutes. We're going to take a basic look at the UK censuses. Now, if you're familiar with using the census in the United States, these records are going to seem very familiar to you, although there are some pretty big differences, but it's the same type of record. So, a little bit about the history of the UK censuses. The very first one was conducted in 1801 in England and in Wales. But what's important about that 1801 census, and in fact the first few censuses that they took in the United Kingdom, is that it's only a count. It truly was just a census. It was just a head count. So there's not really anything that those very, very early censuses are going to tell us as genealogists. They're not really going to solve any genealogical problems. The first one that's important to us as genealogists is the census from 1841, because this was the first one that included the names. It's kind of an important piece of information if you're going to use a record for genealogy. It really helps to have the names in there. So we see that for the first time in the 1841 census in the United Kingdom. And just like in the United States, the censuses in the United Kingdom are taken every 10 years. But instead of being taken on the years that end in 0, like they are in the United States, they're taken on the years that end in 1. So 1841, 1851, 1861, and so on. But they are taken every 10 years. It's important to know how the census has been conducted. Unlike the United States, where census takers go door to door and ask people about the people that are living in the household, in the United Kingdom, forms were left off at each household before the official census date. So let's say that the official census date was March the 2nd. Whoever was responsible for conducting the census in that area would distribute the forms to the household a few days before that date. And then those forms were filled out by someone in the household. And then after the census date, the census taker would come by and collect those forms, and then all of those forms would be arranged and compiled. And it's important to know that it's those compilations that we use. We're not seeing the actual form that the various households filled out. What we're seeing are what the census, the equivalent of the Census Bureau, would take those forms and compile them, put them in order. And it's those compilations that we use when we are using the UK Census, because those original forms have been destroyed, unfortunately. So let's start with two of the more recent censuses that are available out of the United Kingdom, and those are 1891 and 1901. These two censuses are very similar. What's great about these more recent censuses is that they list the relationships of everyone to the head of the household, so you don't have to guess how these various people are related. It's actually a question on the census. You also see information about marital status. And what's wonderful about these records is that it will list the place of birth. Now, if the birth happened in Great Britain, They were supposed to record both the parish and the county. That is tremendously important when we're doing our research in the United Kingdom. If they were born outside of Great Britain, let's say, for example, the person was born in Spain, it's only going to list the country. It's not going to get us down to that, down to that parish level. But again, it's giving us wonderful information about the place of birth. And in 1891 and in 1901, in the censuses that were conducted in Wales and Scotland, there was also a question about what language the person spoke. And in these two censuses, not only do we see their occupation, but we also see sort of their employment status. Were they an employer, meaning that they had a business and they were employing others? Were they employed, or were they neither? And neither could be people who were unemployed or could be people who were sole proprietors. You see a lot of women who were dressmakers or lace makers. You would see that they would be listed with the occupation of dressmaker, but they were neither an employer nor employed. So we have those questions on 1891 and 1901. And a neat little question, talking about the house, it would list the number of rooms that were occupied if it was less than 5. So kind of a quirky little question, but one of those questions that's going to give us a little bit of context, a little bit of meat to the bones for this household. Now let's take a look at the 1901 schedule. And again, if you're familiar with working with the US Census, this is a form that's going to feel very familiar. And what we have at the top is information about the location. We have the house number, we have the street, again, information about the house itself, and then we get into the names of the people in the household, how they're related, their marital status, their age, and they saved a little bit of space because instead of having a column to mark male or female, they combined the male and female with the age column. So if it was male, they would record the age in one column. If the person was female, they would record it in the other column. Then again, information about occupation and that employer, worker, or neither question. Also would ask if they worked at home and where they were born. There's also a question on the very right-hand side asking about disabilities, if the person was deaf, if they were blind. Questions, and it's a phrase that we certainly wouldn't use today, but were they a lunatic or were they an imbecile? So again, seeing terms that we certainly don't use today, but it was the terminology that was used back when this record was created. And we'll just zoom in a little bit more so you can see it a little bit better. So we have the names of each person, their relationship to the head of the family, or the head of the household, and their age, and then the questions about their occupation and their birthplace. Again, if they were born within the United Kingdom, it was supposed to list both the parish and the county. Great information there. The 1891 census looks almost identical. And remember, in 1891 and 1901, there's that special column in the censuses for Wales and Scotland asking about what language was spoken. Now let's move back a little bit to some of the earlier censuses, 1851, 61, 71, and 81. Now these 4 censuses are very similar to what we just saw in 1891 and 1901. But there are 3 questions that are not included. We have lost the question about what language was spoken in Wales and Scotland. We lose the question about their employment status, whether they were an employer, employed, or neither. And we lose that quirky little question about the number of rooms occupied. Now, here's an example of the 1881 census. And again, it looks very much like what we just saw in 1891 and 1901. Information about the location at the top of the page, and then the household, listing everyone by name and listing their relationship to the head of the household, their marital status, age, occupation, and where they were born. 1871 is virtually identical to 1881. Moving back to 1861, there's a slight difference in one of the questions. Instead of asking about if the person was blind, deaf, an imbecile, or lunatic, they just have a question to mark if they were blind or if they were deaf. So we lose just a little bit of information here on the 1861. And again, 1851 is virtually identical to what we see in 1861. But we have a big change as we move back to 1841. Lots of changes in the 1841 census. Something very, very important to remember about the 1841 census. If the person's age was over the age of 15, that age was supposed to be recorded rounded down to the nearest 5. So if a person was age 32, their age was supposed to be recorded as 30. So this can make it very difficult for us as we're moving back in time to make sure that we actually have the correct person in 1841, because all of a sudden, that age that we're expecting, it's going to be off by several years. And this can be compounded if the person who gave the information was a little bit off. So let's say that the person was actually 31 years old. Well, on the census, they're supposed to be recorded as 30. Well, what happens if the person who gave the information said that they were only 29? Well, now that's going to get rounded all the way down to 25. So you're going to see some big changes when you're looking at those ages in the 1841 census. So this is when you're going to want to look at other things like who else is in the household? Where is this person located? Is their residence consistent with what you thought? Who are the neighbors? What's the occupation? Those types of things will help you determine if that is actually the right person, even though the age is way off of what you expected. Also in the 1841 census, we don't see the relationships to the head of the household. Everyone's listed by name, and we see sort of their age, and we see their gender, but we don't see that relationship. So we're sort of left to guess as to how these household members are related. And we lose that great detail about birthplace. Instead of it listing the parish and the county where the person was born, it only notes whether or not they were born in that county. So it can still be good information, but it's not nearly as detailed as what we saw from 1851 all the way through 1901. And one last note about the 1841 census. The compilations that we use were written mostly in pencil, and they can be very hard to read because some of them, you know how when you're working with pencil, it's a lot lighter than when you're writing in pen. So the images can be hard to read because the originals are in pencil. But let's take a look at this 1841 schedule, and you can tell at a glance that we've lost a lot of information. We're not seeing necessarily an exact street. we've lost all that information about the relationships and some employment status and those great questions about exact birthplace. Zoom in just a little bit here, but what we can see is the question over here, whether or not the person was born in this county. So we can see here at the top, William Jones was not, Catherine Jones was not, but John Jones and this younger William Jones were born in this county. Now, if the person had been born in another country, then there was supposed to be a notation in this very last column. Again, it's not the richest detail that we might hope to find, but we can glean some good clues out of this. So when you're searching for the UK Censuses on archives.com, after you log in, the best way to get specifically into these collections is to go into the Search tab, which will be found at the top of every page. Just click on Search, and you'll get a page that looks like this. And to get started in the UK Censuses, over on this left-hand side, select the type of record that you'd like to find, which in this case is going to be census records. After you've selected census records, then you can go down into this residence location. If you're looking for records from England, the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, or Wales, select United Kingdom. If you're looking for someone in Scotland, you can select Scotland separately. And then when you've entered the name and you've entered what location, what broad location you're looking for, you can also narrow down by a county, and you can also narrow it by census year. So if I'm looking for John Ramsey, I can look in a specific county in a specific census year, which is what I've done on this search. I was looking for John Ramsey in County Cumberland in 1891, and I got 10 results. I can change this and I can edit it however I need to. Right here on the results screen, I can change the name, I can change the location, I can change the census year, whatever I need to do to change that search to find those people that I'm looking for. I can do that right there. And of course, when I see a record that I'm interested in, I can click on it to get further details, as well as seeing the actual census image. All right, so next week on the archives.com live stream, we're going to ask the question, does that record even exist? There are so many things that we're looking for when we're researching our ancestors, and I don't know of anyone that has unlimited time to work on it, so we need to really take a look at finding the records that actually exist. Not all records exist. Unfortunately, not all records have been kept since the beginning of time. So we want to take a look at determining how to find out if a record for a birth, a marriage, or a death should have been created. So we're going to take a look at that next week, next Wednesday, June 19th at the same time, 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. In the meantime, stay connected with archives.com. You can do that via our blog. Certainly like us on Facebook. For those of you who are on Twitter, feel free to follow us. We are at archives.com on Twitter. And all of our previous live streams have been posted to our YouTube channel. So for those of you who are watching this live and you've maybe missed some of our previous live streams, such as last week's live stream where we were talking about how to compile notes so that they make sense later. All of those are now up on the archives.com YouTube channel. For those of you who are watching this later on YouTube, stop by our live stream on Wednesdays. We have a chat room and we have great conversations. Often have a short Q&A after the live stream, so please feel free to join us on Wednesdays. We'd love to see you there. In the meantime, this is Amy Johnson Crow wishing you happy researching.